once again. This is Nuance. We'll be speaking of the first Dayton Beach Park election in 7 years and some other topics. It's always funny, Jay, when we go live now, we get that warning that says this is being sent to a third party or something. That's new. It used to
Mm.
say live stream in progress or something much more pleasant. Now it tries to scare you. We'll get into that. But of course, I'm joined by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist and chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on with you, Jay?
Um, just yeah, morning time, getting everything moving and whatnot. Hopefully we're not being sent to a third party that's going to uh I don't know, jack our likeness.
Yeah, so it's kind of an odd thing to see, but I think that may come in response to the changes at Zoom. Remember there was controversy a few months ago about Zoom using AI or something like that, and everyone was freaking out about privacy on Zoom. I saw a lot of lawyers saying they weren't going to use Zoom for their meetings anymore.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I don't think it's coincidence that around this time the language changes. Maybe the lawyers got involved and they updated the disclaimers.
It's possible. Because you have the option in Zoom of using AI, but it's not turned on by default, or you can just turn it on and it will do like a transcription of what's going on or summary or something like that.
Right.
And I can understand how people like, having private conversations wouldn't want what they're saying being sent to a third party server and for processing to come back because, who knows what's going to happen to the data on that end.
Right. And if you're an attorney, for example, you may worry about things like the
Right.
client privilege, right? Confidentiality being broken and whatnot.
Right, right, absolutely. So, yeah, I get that. So,
So yeah, this is the world we live in, a world of lawyers, lawyering, right? We'll get into that in a few minutes here when we talk about Baby Reindeer, the show on Netflix. We were going to talk about that last week, but didn't have time for it. But I think it's an interesting discussion from a legal point of view.
right. Yeah, that's been a lot, I guess this past week, lawyers lawyering type of thing, because OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, unveiled their new Chat GPT or GPT 4.0, and had some enhancements and whatnot. And they showed this incredible situation where you can just basically have a conversation with it, and it sounded very, very human-like, very normal like, and you could even could access your camera on your phone,
Yeah,
and you can be like,
yeah.
oh, what I'm looking at in the room, and it's like, oh, describes what's going on. But what happened was the voice of the AI, the female voice that was using, sounded, or at least Scarlett Johansson thought that it sounded like her, the actress Scarlett
Okay,
Johansson.
that's an interesting
Some
sentence. I wasn't prepared for that
and
sentence to
some
end that
people
way.
some people agree that it sounded suspiciously like her voice and her speaking pattern, so she lawyered up, and I guess that's another thing that's in the news right now.
That's a funny sentence, though. You have to admit, you don't often hear sentences like that. Like someone says something that sounds kind of mundane in the beginning of the sentence, and then it ends with Scarlett Johansson thought. I mean, I just imagine that, like, yeah, like today there was a long line at Burger King, and Scarlett Johansson thought, like, what? It's like, okay, where's this going?
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of crazy. And the thing is, when I saw some of the demos, I didn't think Scarlett Johansson at all. And then when I went back to listen to it again, I still didn't get Scarlett Johansson. I mean,
Mhm.
if you listen, I could hear, okay, there's some similarities. But apparently it was enough that her and her team thought that they need to lawyer up. So,
I don't know about that one.
yeah,
Unless they somehow discover in this case that they really were modeling it after her. But
right,
even then, based on a true story, right? We'll get into that. That's
right,
like, do we need to sue over everything?
right. So, I don't know. I guess we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, yeah. I saw something recently where you could pay, I guess it's an app you can download or whatever. You can pay to have a personalized song created using your voice, but they sing it, right? So maybe you give it your voice, but then it creates a melody of you singing. So it makes you sound like you're a good singer. And you
Right,
could send a personalized song to a friend or family or whatever.
right. Yeah, that would be something similar. Like if you remember, um, probably about last year, I did a cover of the what is it, the song that I did about Kanye.
Mhm.
Um, and I wrote it when I wrote it in old Kanye style, and even delivery was
Kardashian
that.
Kanye.
Yeah, yeah, pre-Kardashian Kanye. And when AI started popping off, I ran it through an AI filter, and it took
Oh,
my voice and used Kanye and switched it to Kanye West, so he was singing
right,
my lyrics.
right.
And so that's a similar thing. So what you would do is you would give them basically a sample of your voice, and then the AI would extrapolate the parts from that and put it over whoever's actually singing it, so it sounds like
I don't,
you
I
are
don't
singing.
like that though, just as in someone who does music, right?
Right.
Because it cheapens everything. And now you can see, like, if we put out something and we pour our heart and our souls into, right? If people will come back, well, is that AI? I could have generated that same verse with AI in 5 minutes. It's like, man, you know what I mean? Like, it just takes the life out of everything.
Well, yeah, and when that first happened, when that technology first started popping up, not too long after, somebody released a Drake song.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I remember
And
there's a bunch of stuff
right.
like that on YouTube. I saw a lot of that kind of stuff.
But this one like came up and
Yeah,
started hitting the charts and
it
stuff. People
sounded
thought it
real.
was real,
Yeah,
but it really wasn't Drake. And then in this recent Drake versus Kanye beef, not Drake versus Kendrick beef, one of Drake's diss songs against Kendrick, he used the voices of Tupac and the voices of Snoop for two verses.
yeah. And could you imagine if artists start monetizing this and they say,
Right.
listen, instead of paying me 50K to do a feature, pay me this fee and I'll give you the permission to generate an AI verse using my voice. I can start seeing that happening, which is kind of crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, the one artist did that already.
Really?
And I forget who it was, not Billie Eilish. It was someone in that type of genre.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, yeah, I give permission to anybody to go ahead and use an AI version of my voice. I don't care. Anyone can do it.
Oh, but she wasn't
Uh,
licensing it though for
she
money.
wasn't licensing it,
Yeah.
but it opened the door for basically anyone to make AI versions of
Mm-hmm.
songs featuring her and really not have to contact. But the licensing part, I definitely could see that be a
Yeah,
possibility.
well, that reminds me of the Scarlett Johansson thing, right? Like she's saying, hey, listen, come up off that money if you want to use my likeness, even
Right.
for AI or anything else, right? It's not really my voice, but it sounds like me. I can see that.
Right.
Someone puts out something with Snoop's voice on, it's probably easy to do as AI, but
Right.
I can see someone like a Snoop saying, listen, you could do that, but there's a fee associated with that. But then it
Right.
starts to blur the line when it's like released as an actual guest appearance and they're not even
Right.
rapping. It's just all computer generated, right?
Right. Yeah, I was just watching a video yesterday from a photographer, and he was talking about AI and the potential that he sees certain types of photography might be going away or might be diminished, like product photography and um but not clip art, but stock photography, because they
Right.
can just generate some of these things with AI. And he was saying that you might see a future where celebrities will license their likeness to brands and not have to go to the photo shoot. You can just send them a
Yeah,
pack of
yeah,
pictures, and then the AI will just create the image based off of those pictures and put
right,
them whatever they want. And then the brand just send it to the celebrity for their approval and then put it out.
right,
They don't have to do any photo shoots or anything.
right. And then instead of the photographer making their living, you would have to have people, I guess, trained in manipulating or trained in the AI
Right.
algorithm, whatever it is, right? They know the right
Prompt
inputs to
engineers.
the prompts, exactly, right? They know
Prompt
how to
engineers, yeah.
generate the best output. So they're not taking the pictures anymore, but they're the best at having AI create those pictures.
Right, yeah. So, yeah.
That's the world that we're headed towards, I guess. I just want people
Oh,
to know
very
that
much.
when I put out this music, none of it is AI. And if you hear a verse on there, that person actually rapped that verse. I rapped that verse. That person was singing. That person made the beat. We didn't have AI because I don't think we're far off from a whole AI produced album. It's coming, but
Oh, it's definitely coming.
there's
And the
not one
first
that's
one that
working on
come, yeah,
it. I don't want
it's
people to get
definitely
my music.
yeah, it's definitely coming. Lyrics and everything. The lyrics, I mean, it can do kind of as far as rap, it can make some rhymes, but they're just not
They're
very
not
good.
good. They're not
You
good.
can tell.
Not good.
But here's the thing. They're not that good, but a lot of rappers these days rhymes aren't that good either. They're focusing more on making just bops instead of like lyrical intricacy or skill. So, could one of these AI raps actually make it on the boards? As long as the beat is good, as long
Mhm.
as, the melody on it, people just think, oh, I can bob my head to it,
Right.
you know. So,
Yeah, the one thing that I've used AI for was reviewing lyrics and saying,
right.
did
Yeah.
you catch all the meaning in this? Because if the AI can't get it, then I start to think maybe it's too obscure or too esoteric or not clear enough, right? So if the AI can tell me all the references that I came up with, then I know that they're real references that people should be able to understand. And the other
Right.
thing is titles. I've actually copied and pasted lyrics that I've written to AI, and I said, any good ideas for a title for this? And it's given me
Right.
some suggestions. So
I've been real impressed with that. I've done the same thing as far not titles, but with just kind of seeing how the AI interprets certain lyrics.
mm-hmm.
And I've been real impressed. It seems to
Yeah,
catch a lot of those meanings.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, wow, that's crazy.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah, so to me, it's a good litmus test. If the AI has no idea what I'm talking about, then I think that most people probably won't either.
right, right, right. So, yeah, it's crazy. But I
Well,
mean, again, how far is it if it can interpret the lyrics? How long is it before it can actually write lyrics like that?
right,
You know?
right.
So, yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah, speaking of crazy, Dayton Beach Park
Hmm.
finally had their first election since 2017, and what a quagmire. That's a good word, right? Quagmire.
Quagmire's a dope word.
Yeah, I think that's a good word to
It should be a
describe.
brand. It should be like a clothing brand, Quagmire.
Hmm, not a bad
Just
idea.
right across the chest,
Yeah,
Quag. But then the
rocking that,
people
rocking
think
that
about the
pew,
Family Guy.
I
They think
guess.
about the Family Guy character, and he's kind of like a pedo and a perv, so it
Oh,
might
is
not
he?
be a good thing to wear. Yeah.
Okay, I've heard the name from the show. I'm not familiar with that character,
Oh, okay.
but this certainly was that. You're talking about. I even said in the wave last week that this could be a Netflix docuseries of its own,
Wow.
based on all of the shenanigans that have been going on there since 2017. The board of directors at these co-ops in Rockaway haven't faced elections since 2017. There's supposed to be election of directors every year, and that's important. I think a lot of people don't understand why it's so important to have an election of directors or to have
Mm,
a duly elected board. Who cares,
mm,
right? Some people might just not understand. But if you're living there, you get it, right? They really do have a lot of control over what happens in the buildings, right?
mm,
In terms of who the management company is going to be, the security, how the money is spent, right? Who's getting the contracts. They really are in charge of everything that really affects you locally, day to day, as a resident of those buildings. And so if you're there, it means a whole lot. And really, the most important thing is that you have a voice. We
right.
had the president of Dayton Towers, which is another co-op in Rockaways, really neighbors of Dayton Beach Park. We had their president on here once, and we talked about what they were doing to make changes at Dayton Towers. They were dealing with something nowhere near that level, but they had issues there as well. And the good news is that you do have regular elections where if you don't like what's going on there, well, then you can organize your neighbors and you can run for the board and you can make some changes yourself. It's really a great way to avail yourself to democracy at the most local of levels. The problem with Dayton Beach Park was that there was no election. So while things were happening that many people were not happy about, the residents had no ability to voice their opinion via the ballot box, right? There was no
Mm,
vote. And so that's really frustrating, right? It's bad enough when you're the resident at one of these buildings, one of these co-ops, and you don't like what's going on with management or with the board or whatever. But if you have an election, then you at least have that light at the end of the tunnel, right? That option to run and say, all right, well, I'm going to make a positive change myself and get in here. You know, it's really a double whammy, right? When things are not going well, there's all kinds of reports of mismanagement and bullying tactics, intimidation, all kinds of craziness, people being evicted or attempted to be evicted without cause for retaliation and so forth. So while that's happening and you can't run for election, you can't even vote out the people who are in there now, you really feel helpless in that situation, right? And
mm.
so that was what Dayton Beach Park had faced for 7 years.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds crazy. I mean, you would it, it doesn't sound like something that a co-op would face. Like it sounds like you said, like a documentary or a Netflix series about a maybe a city political campaign or something like
Right.
that. Like you're talking about a co-op building, like it's kind of crazy.
Right, right. And that's also, I think, what makes it so crazy, because you wouldn't expect that. And you wouldn't expect these volunteer board members to want to hold on to that power so much. I mean, we're talking about lawsuits, right? All the litigation, all the administrative hearings, all the eviction proceedings going on, all these things happening to delay and to stall and to hold on to that power by whatever means necessary. You wouldn't expect it to get that deep, like you said, at just a co-op, right? A bunch of
Mm.
buildings in the Rockaways. And so I think that's what makes it so compelling as a story, right? That's why it would be a good docuseries for people to be like, wow, I can't believe all this goes on here, just over control of these buildings. You know what I mean? Control of
Right.
these few buildings. Now, 2017, the Department of Investigation of New York City came in and they cited discrepancies with the election. There was a big controversy over who was entitled to vote, right? Who was a valid shareholder in a co-op and who wasn't. And so it ended up in court where the board and HPD, which is the city agency in charge of overseeing co-ops like that,
Mm.
they were fighting it out over, whose methodology should prevail. HPD had their way of determining who was a valid shareholder. The board said no, it should be like this. These people shouldn't count. These people shouldn't count. And they were going back and forth. Now this was happening in a courthouse in Manhattan, and it resulted in a judge in Manhattan putting a stay on the election while this was all sorted out. It was a preliminary injunction, meaning before we proceed with having another election, we're going to figure out who is a shareholder, who isn't, what the terms of the election should be, what parameters need to be in place. And at the end of the lawsuit, figuring all that out, then we could proceed with a new election. The problem is that once that preliminary injunction was issued, and this was ongoing in Manhattan, there was no resolution to it for years, right? And then COVID struck, and that shut down the courts for another 2 years or so. And so, in all this time now, you've got a judge ordering no election to proceed until
Mm.
the mess is sorted out, and then all kinds of delay tactics used, motions get filed, right? It just becomes a whole big legal battlefield. So while this is all happening, the shareholders, meaning the people who own stocks in the corporation, the people who live there, paid into the corporation, into the co-op, they uh, had no voice. They had no say in the matter. Not only did they have no say by virtue of not having an election now, they didn't even have a say in the lawsuit that was going on in Manhattan, because it was between the board and the city agency, HPD.
Mm.
So all these shareholders now who can't vote and their rights are being stripped in all kinds of ways, they can't even have a say. They can't even have their voices heard, even in the legal proceedings. So that's where I got involved, right? A number of shareholders retained me to file a lawsuit in Queens against the board and against HPD for not providing the proper oversight and saying that their rights were being stripped. They were being deprived of their voice. Of course, the lawsuit cited all sorts of issues with the board and with the co-op and with the management and so forth, with HPD for not providing the proper oversight. But what this ended up doing was it created a situation where we had one lawsuit now in Queens that we filed, a related lawsuit in Manhattan, right? And there was a question of, well, where should these lawsuits be decided, considering they're really related cases? Our claim was really us as shareholders intervening and saying that we need to be a part of this action, because you just can't have a battle between a board and the city without including the actual residents, who aren't just board members, but the residents of the co-op broadly. So it was decided that yes, these cases should be heard by the same court, by the same judge, but where, right? The city and the board wanted to keep it in Manhattan and convert our case to Manhattan as well. Whereas we said, no, it should all be heard in Queens. The co-op physically is in Queens. The board is in Queens. All the oversight decisions are made maybe from their office in Manhattan, but they're made to affect what goes on in Queens. So Queens has a bigger stake in the outcome of this case, right? So again, I mentioned how things get delayed by virtue of motions being filed. Yeah, this was another step in the process. Now you have to have a judge decide the outcome of this motion before you could proceed to the next steps of the case, right? But it was an important step because remember, it was the Manhattan judge that had issued a stay on the election. So in Manhattan, they were content holding up this election indefinitely until all these issues were resolved, which could have taken many more years. We said, no, let's get this to Queens. Queens judges are going to know more about these Queens co-ops anyway, right? In fact, when they filed the lawsuit in Manhattan, at oral argument, the judge said, by the way, you know there's a courthouse in Queens, right? Why are you even in Manhattan? So it was clear that Queens was the better venue for this. Well, one of the arguments, man, I should really frame this on my wall. One of the arguments made by opposing counsel was that we were too politically powerful in Queens for them to get a fair trial. Keep in mind, we are being opposed not just by the board, but by the city of New York here. So isn't it kind of crazy that they're saying, the opposition is saying to us, they can't get a fair trial in the county of Queens? It's impossible to get an impartial trial.
And so, they're supposedly representing New York?
Yes, the city of New York, and it's the board, teamed up against me at this point because I'm representing the shareholders in Queens. And they're both saying that it should be in Manhattan. And one of the arguments that they present is that we are too politically influential in Queens for them to get a fair trial in Manhattan, in Queens. So it should be in Manhattan. The thing is, they didn't offer any real evidence of that. They just said it as a conclusion without backing it up in any kind of way. So that wasn't even really addressed. Ultimately, the judge in Manhattan decided that Queens was the more appropriate venue. And I even attached to my motion that transcript from the oral argument when they filed their lawsuit. That same judge said, why are you guys here? You know, there's a courthouse in Queens, right? So I said, clearly from the beginning, this judge sees Queens even as the better place for this. And there was no dispute. Well, I shouldn't even say that. There was, I guess the city was arguing that Queens was not a proper place to file the lawsuit in the first place because they were saying that their offices, the agency, HPD, which is the oversight agency, since their offices are based in Manhattan, that's where they make all their decisions, and therefore the case had to be Manhattan. And it was almost as if they were saying that anytime you sued them, it had to be Manhattan. And I put that in my answer. I said, that can't be right. I said, if you look at the CPLR, right, the law that tells you where you can file a lawsuit, it doesn't say that the defendant's offices are the only place that you can sue them. That's one of the options, but it gives you a whole list of options. It says, this place or that place or that place. Like one of them is where the material events took place. So I said, if they can only be sued in Manhattan, then the law wouldn't provide a list of ors, right? A list of choices. So I think they walked that back a little bit and they were like, oh, we're not saying we can only be sued in Manhattan, but they kind of were by saying that their offices are in Manhattan. That's the only place we can sue them for this case. I mean, if logically that would mean that you can sue them only in Manhattan for any case, right? If that's what they're saying. So that wasn't persuasive. Ultimately, again, the Manhattan judge agreed with us that Queens was the appropriate venue for this. So everything got transferred to Queens. And in Queens, the judge dismissed the stay and said that the board had to lose its case as well because they had not proven that HPD had acted in an arbitrary and capricious manner in setting the election parameters. In other words, we're going to defer to HPD as the oversight agency unless you can show that they did something that was so outrageous and so outside the bounds of the law. But they haven't proven that. It was just a matter of HPD saying election should be done like this. The board saying, no, it should be done like this. They said, listen, this is a dispute. We're not going to hold this up indefinitely. It's pretty clear that if you sue them over something like this, the burden is on you to show that they did something that was so outside the bounds, and you haven't proven that. So your case is dismissed and the election can proceed in accordance with HPD's parameters. And that's really the ultimate relief that I was seeking in this as the attorney for the shareholders, because it all goes back to, do they have a voice, right?
Right.
More action followed about, well, should the board be removed entirely? And that was one of the things that we were asking for their mismanagement. But when you have the election cleared, that provides a path. It's kind of like the path of least resistance. You'll see this from judges and courts and hearing officers, everyone. You're trying to argue for this extra relief. At a certain point, they'll be like, all right, listen, the election was held up by the stay that the first judge issued, and that maybe created an avenue for you to ask for these other things. But now that that stay is no longer there, now that that path is open, your best relief is to go have the election and win the election. Then all this other stuff we're arguing about becomes moot. So that's where it ended up, right? With this election finally being scheduled after all these years.
It's crazy that it took 7 years.
Yeah. And really, this is the condensed version. The issues there have been going on for a lot longer than that, really up to 15 years. But 7 years ago, 2017 was the last time there actually was an election. And immediately thereafter, the results were vacated due to disparities that were found, right? And then you have issues like, proxy votes and potential ballot box stuffing and, you know what I mean? All kinds of stuff, of issues. In fact, at one point, the Department of Investigation recommended the board's removal due to some of the things that they were involved in. So
Jesus, that's
this is some serious stuff. And I don't want to relitigate old issues because it's a new day. I don't want to be stuck in the past so much. I don't want to talk out of turn here. But I think suffice it to say that there have been many issues at this co-op for a very long time, and the shareholders have been deprived of a voice for a very long time. So it was a beautiful thing to finally get this election happening this past week. And of course, I was there on site to make sure that it went smoothly, that there weren't any issues, because last time there was an election, it was marred with issues, right?
Right.
So it did seem like this time things went well. I think they realized a lot of eyes were on them. There was so much litigation over this, right? So many legal battles that I don't think anyone thought they can necessarily get away with anything at this point. So we have the results today, and what a landslide victory it was. If I can pull up, see James in the chat. What's going on, James?
So was the
results here.
I'm sorry?
I'll pull up the results. Go ahead.
I was going to say, were the people that were holding those board spots, were they removed in this election? Or were they running again?
Yeah. So they were running again. You had 30 people running, right? 15 spots on the board. So when you go vote as a shareholder here, you have to vote for 15 or up to 15 people on your ballot, right? So 15 of the candidates were insurgent or outsider candidates running against the board. 15 represented the board. And to be fair, I'm not sure if all 15 of the other candidates were previously board members, because I don't know if all the 15 of them ran again, but I know many of them did. And so you did have this kind of clean battle of 15 versus 15 going on. It's like almost like one slate versus the other. So 434, let me see if I can zoom in on this. Yes, 434 people voted in this election at the co-ops. And all 15 of the outsider candidates won. But it wasn't even close, because if you look at, and this is on my Facebook page, I posted this tally because it was posted publicly already, so I just shared it. But if you look at candidate number 15, who won 274 votes, right? You go to candidate number 16, 78 votes. So you can see a major drop off between, right? All the candidates who won got over 200. In fact, the 274 was number 15, and it goes into the 300s as well. So some got over 300, I think one candidate got over 350. So it's a huge drop off from that to the bottom half of this, where they're getting 78 votes, 75 votes, 67 votes. The current board president, who's going to be the outgoing president now, 58 votes. So you can see really what a landslide this was.
Right.
And I knew that that was going to happen if this election was contested fairly, because when I was in those buildings knocking on doors, the number one comment I heard was, we got to get rid of this board. In fact, there was a petition that went around and 450 people signed it. And they all said, all people who lived in these buildings said that they want to get rid of the board. It's a vote of no confidence in the board. They want the board removed. That was the number one issue, right? You're going there to talk about what's going on in the city. You're maybe campaigning for city council, or if you're campaigning, let's say, for the state assembly or state senate, you're knocking on doors, talking to residents about issues important to them. In those buildings, number one issue you're going to hear is the board. The board's got to go. What can we do about this board? Can we get an election? How do you? One person said to me, "How do you feel about the board?" I said, "Well, to be honest with you, the board is operating illegally right now because they're in there without an election, and they're purposely trying to stall the election because they don't want the voices to be heard." And that's all I had to say for him to be like, "I'm voting for you." So that was on top of everyone's minds there. And I told people time and time again, if you get this election, you guys are going to win if it's done right. And, but with this kind of a landslide victory, it would be hard for them to cheat if they wanted to. I mean, you're talking 200 votes separating them from the insurgents out of, how many people did I say voted? 400 something?
Yeah,
434? Yeah. So that's a big drop off, right? If they were trying to play some games and, do some ballot stuffing, whatever they were going to try to, this is not trying to manipulate a couple of votes here. You're talking hundreds. You're talking like half the population of the voters, right? So it's a very convincing win, indicative of a mandate, right, for a new day at Dayton Beach Park. I mean, we're getting now 15. I had spoken to some people. I said, listen, the goal here is the majority, right? Because if you have the majority of the board, obviously you control what goes on. And even if you have some of the prior board members on, you'll be able to outvote them by having the majority. And then if you don't have the majority now, well, you'll get some people on now. And now that we have elections again, that's really all you need. You keep fighting for it year after year. You keep organizing and getting people to vote and getting people on the board. So I said to them, it was very likely they would take the majority on the first shot. But if they didn't, at least they had the opportunity to keep running. Well, not only did they get the majority, they've got every single vote now. They've got all 15 out of 15, a clean sweep. And so thank God we finally have a new day at Dayton Beach Park.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And hopefully the new board will do right by the people, and everything will work smoothly from here.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
People were really suffering there. And there's actually a video on my YouTube channel. I've been putting up footage. I have so many videos of things that I've done, and just various video footage of me over the years. And they've been primarily posted to different social media channels, but I thought it would be good to get them all in one place on a YouTube page so that people can look up my Scala videos, right? See the stuff that I've done out there. So I do have a video now up on my YouTube page about this, talking about the lawsuit we were planning on filing at the time. And you could hear from some of the residents in the buildings about some of what they were going through at the time, right? When you have mismanagement to a great degree, you start dealing with things like, loss of heat, no hot water, and all these things that you depend on as a tenant, as a resident. And really, let's not forget, they're not renters, right? They actually own
co-owners, yeah.
Right, they own stock in the co-op. And so it's not even like their landlord, right, is not doing what it's really their own money. They own it, but it's being managed improperly, and it's causing them all kinds of problems. And then you have, again, I don't want to relitigate all this, but you have things like accusations of self-dealing and favoritism, like, giving apartments to maybe your friends or family or whatever while others can't get in, and all kinds of stuff. A big one was trying to evict those they had issues with, or doing things like taking away their parking space, right?
How can you do that if they're co-owners? How can you?
Because they try to, yeah, they come up with ways to challenge their status as a shareholder, and they'll say things like, "Oh, well, you inherited this apartment from someone who died 50 years ago, but look, going back all these years, the paperwork wasn't done correctly. You didn't sign this the right way. The procedure wasn't followed the right way." They try to find a way to get you to say that you don't truly qualify as a shareholder, even though
Gotcha.
a lot of it is frivolous. A lot of the rules were actually changed to stop them from being that petty, right?
Right.
But I've defended people, clients who live there, have come to me to defend them against eviction proceedings and
Right.
stuff like that. And often it would seem retaliatory, like, okay, this gentleman's wife was involved in the lawsuit against the board. Is it a coincidence now they're going after him?
Right.
Meanwhile, you can point to 20 other instances of people doing exactly the way he did, and they're not getting called out for it, but only he is. So
Okay.
there's all kinds of stuff like that, or that was happening. So we're hopeful that that's no longer going to be the case. If someone is living there, they're paying their maintenance, right? They call it the rent. They're paying what they got to pay. They're doing what they got to do. Hopefully, no one will be harassed and bothered and subjected to all of these legal battles anymore, right? Because part of it also was, you could file something against someone and that maybe they're going to win if they challenge it, but you have a corporate counsel, because as the board, you have a lawyer who is the co-op's lawyer, but you have access to that lawyer to do your bidding, essentially, right? Because when the board goes after someone, it's not the president of the board or the board members or the board collectively versus this person. It's the corporation. It's the whole Dayton Beach Park corporation versus that person, because they're acting on behalf of the corporation as board members, meaning they have access to corporate counsel, meaning they don't have to pay out of their own pocket for this lawyer, but you do if they go after you. And so what ends up happening, they can tie you up in court for years until eventually you don't want to, or you can't afford to keep paying the legal fees anymore. And then maybe you just move out because you can't deal with that for so long.
Right.
So that does happen. In fact, in our case, we filed a motion to disqualify corporate counsel, because guess what? When we filed as the shareholders against the board and against HPD, who answered the lawsuit? The corporate counsel. But now you have a situation where the shareholders, a group of shareholders, is going against the board members, and the corporation's attorney is representing those board members against the shareholders. So that's a conflict of interest, because now it isn't the entire corporation going up against a shareholder or shareholders. It's the corporate counsel attempting to represent individual board members against individual shareholders. So it's corporate counsel siding with some shareholders over other shareholders in this battle. And so the case law is very clear on that's a conflict of interest and grounds for disqualification. And so that corporate counsel did have to leave the case, because what ended up happening was the shareholders were footing the bill for the attorney opposing them in the case.
Right. And no one would want that.
No, nor is that fair. I mean, it's really not even fair when corporate counsel goes against a shareholder in an eviction proceeding, let's say, but that's a bit of a different situation, because that is an individual board members against individual shareholders. That's the whole corporation, in theory, going against the shareholder for non-payment of rent or whatever issue that they want to bring up. So it's a bit of a different situation, but still, I mean, you can understand it, right? That again, you are part owner of this corporation. You're paying money into it every month, and that money that you pay is being used to hire a lawyer to go against you.
Right.
I mean, that's crazy, right? It's got to be a crazy feeling.
Well, at least it's all worked out now. Everything is good.
Yeah, well, knock on wood, right? I mean, this is just the first step. It's kind of like in music, they say getting signed is the easiest part.
Right.
now comes the actual work, and
Right.
hopefully it will be a smooth transition, right, from board to board, and we
Right.
can get all these issues ironed out. I don't think anyone should be subjected to eviction proceedings or anything like that if they're doing what they need to do. I mean, I don't want to reveal confidential information because I can go deeper into some of the
Yeah,
issues my
yeah.
clients, right? Even people I'm representing that they're trying to say to show how ridiculous it is. And I don't want to do that. But, I think we could leave it by saying that some of these issues really have been frivolous, that they try to get you, or they accuse you of things that aren't true based on really flimsy evidence that you could easily disprove.
Yeah. So, all
So
right.
let me try making a call. I don't know if she's going to answer because I know that they're celebrating right now.
Oh, that's good. Popping the
Have her number on my phone. Let me try through here.
popping champagne, doing the two-step.
I told him that too. You have to take some time to celebrate. I know now is when the real work begins, but you have to cool out for a bit, enjoy the moment, right? You can't burn yourself out by not taking a break.
Right. Yeah, and especially, I mean, you're talking about something that's been going on for 7 years, a fight that's gone on for 7 years. You want to drink that in a little bit.
You have to.
Yeah. Uh-oh, the live call.
Yeah, see if we get an answer.
Do they know that they're going to be on? You might
Yes.
want to start that on mute so they don't hear.
No,
They
they
might
know.
pick up the phone like, "Hey, F you,
I hope not.
quit calling me."
All right, we're gonna let them celebrate. But
Yeah, they probably
I did give the heads up that we would be calling, but also I know that they're meeting and they're celebrating their victory. So
right. They're in the midst of revelry.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So that's what's up. That's what's up. So
So yeah, finally, hopefully, we can turn the page and not have to deal with this every week, every month, getting these calls of
right,
other things happening at this co-op.
right. So
So, all right, well, what's a good segue from that to, I guess, more legal shenanigans, right? More legal battles potentially here.
legal shenanigans. Shenanigans is another good word. I like that.
Shenanigans.
I like shenanigans.
Yeah. So, Baby Reindeer was, I guess, the number one show on Netflix for a bit, based in the UK, which I suppose is rare, right? I think usually they're American shows. I know Squid Game did well being a Korean show.
Right.
And that also probably was so newsworthy because of the fact that it was not an American show, right? I think usually the American shows dominate the charts here, so to speak. So when you get a foreign
In the
show
U
like Baby Reindeer to hit number one
right.
worldwide, right?
Yeah.
That is noteworthy. And in fact, I've seen people say online that the woman, the character and all the stuff is basically the most talked about topic in the UK, period, right now.
Mm. Wow.
So they're having a moment, right? I think they're all kind of
Yeah.
fascinated by that show. Now, I know you hadn't seen it. Have you seen it yet?
I have not seen it. Like when we talked before about it, I saw the preview, and it's got that scene where the woman is sitting at the bar, and the bartender comes over, and at first it's like she seems normal, then she sounds a little crazy. I saw that, and it seemed intriguing. And a friend of mine also saw it, and she thought the same thing. And then she watched it, and she was
Mm-hmm.
just like, "Eh." That was like the high point of the whole thing. The rest of it's just
Really?
bleh. Yeah.
She saw the whole thing and had that impression, or she turned it off?
She watched I don't know how many episodes it is,
Yeah.
but she watched, yeah.
Wow. You
Didn't
see,
she, yeah.
I kind of almost had the opposite impression of it
Mm,
because I wasn't really into it at first, but I watched it. It was kind of just background viewing at first. I said, it looked kind of interesting, and all right, I don't know what else to watch, and just kind of had it on in the back. But it drew me in more and more as the show progressed, and
mm,
I thought that the writing on it was phenomenal. That's really what drew me. It was
mm,
written so well that I appreciated it just from that standpoint alone, I'm like, wow, I've rarely seen a show written so masterfully.
Wow, that's glowing reviews. They might need to interview you.
But yeah, so that's what kept me watching it, the way that it was written. And the background on this is that it was a one-man stage show, I believe. The star of the show was also the writer. And
Mm,
so he was doing a stage show. He was a comedian, stand-up comedian in the UK. He turned this into a stage show that he was doing at the festivals or whatever. And I guess producers from Netflix or whoever saw it and asked him if he was willing to turn it into a Netflix series. And he said yes. And so he acts in it, the guy you see on the Netflix show. He is a star of it. He was also the writer, which took me a few episodes to connect those dots. Okay, that's the same guy. Now, here's the
okay.
thing. When you watch it, it doesn't say based on a true story or inspired by true events or anything like that. It says this is a true story. That may
Okay.
turn out to be legally relevant, right? Because this is about himself, right? A stand-up comedian in the UK who was working at a bar and who allegedly was stalked by a patron at the bar.
So this is what happened to him, really? To the writer?
So he says this is true.
Ah, okay.
So this woman in the show, her name was Martha on the show. She becomes very infatuated with him because he gives her some attention. I think she comes in, she says that she's broke, she can't afford a drink or whatever. He gets her a drink on a house and she just falls head over heels, right? That's how it's presented on the show. And then she very quickly becomes a stalker. And in fact, they keep showing on the screen throughout the series these emails that she's supposedly sending him, all poorly written, which is weird considering that she's supposed to be a lawyer or a disbarred lawyer or something like that. Yet she can't
Right.
put a sentence together. It's like, how do you even pass the bar if you can't read or write? I don't know. But it's very strange. The thing about it is, though, these emails that you see on the screen supposedly are real emails that he got from the real person.
Right.
So while this is not a documentary, right, you're watching a dramatized version of events. They're saying it's a true story, and the emails they're putting on the screen are supposedly the real person's emails that she sent him in real life, right?
Right.
So that happens. At the end of it, I'm not going to spoil it necessarily for those who haven't seen it, and it's not really that relevant to our discussion here. At the end of the series, the stalker character goes to prison for stalking him and for stalking his family, right?
Okay.
Because she gets very harassing and even makes a violent threat or two and basically
Right.
crosses the line. At first, the cops say, listen, this is just a bunch of emails from a crazy lady, whatever. But then it crosses
Right.
the line where eventually they arrest her and they sentence her to a year. I was kind of surprised by that. I forget what it was on the show, but it was a few years in prison that they sentenced her to for. But here's the thing: they're claiming that she sent 41,000 emails over a couple of years.
Jesus Christ.
41,000 is, I mean, if you do the math on that, you only have 365 days in a year, right? You
That's
divide it out.
crazy.
You're talking about many per day. I mean, let's say it was 5 years. Let's do some quick math on that, right? Let's say let's 41,000. Let's say divided by 5 years is 8,200 a year. A year. Divide that by 365. That's over 22 a day. So
Yeah.
on average, if this was 5 years, I think it was about that time period, they're saying, let's say over 20 emails a day that she was allegedly sending him.
Huh.
Right. And then on the show, she eventually gets his phone number, then starts sending a bunch of voicemails and everything else. Right.
He
So,
was quite busy.
yeah, if you believe it. Now, here's where it gets interesting from a legal perspective, because we know the show went #1 in Netflix and worldwide.
Right.
Everyone's talking about it. Everyone is all into it. Well,
Yeah.
the real life woman is claiming it's not true, or at least a lot of it, as depicted on the show, isn't true. Strikingly, she says she was never arrested, never did prison time for this. The cops never even talked to her about this. She said that part was completely made up. She said she never sent 41,000 emails. She said they had some banter. Her answer to how many emails did you actually send them? She said maybe a handful. Well, a handful is much different, obviously, from 41,000, right? And that's not even in the same stratosphere.
Right.
So she's saying that he actually had a crush on her. If anything, he was kind of stalking her, or he was into her, and she turned him down. And that's why he got mad. He's lying about the fact that she stalked him. She never stalked him. That's what she's saying.
But
Now,
whether she went to prison or not is easily provable.
you would think, right? And people looked into this. Apparently, from what has been discovered, she hasn't been to prison, or at least there's no record of her being in prison under her name now. But they know that she changed her name, and she might have had a few different names. And so it seemed like it was still questionable as to whether she might have been in prison under a different name, although you would think they could look up all the names. I don't know if maybe this is the name that they don't know that she had used before, but they know that she changed her name.
Mm.
So there's that. There's the question of, did she really send the 41,000 emails, or was it a handful? But then there's a question of, does it matter? I mean, this is a Netflix show. Again, it's not presented as a documentary, but it does say this is a true story. And so if she's going to sue them for defamation, it's a different name. They're not using her real name on the show. Is she able to sue just based on the fact, let's presume that she's correct, that she never sent that many emails and she never went to jail, went to prison for any of this? Does that give her a claim for defamation, even though they don't use her name on the show? It's not a documentary. It is still a show with actors, and it's clearly a drama, just dramatized.
Right. So they don't identify her. I guess the only way people know that they're talking about her is that she came forward and said, "Hey, you're lying about."
Well, no. So yes, here's the thing: internet sleuths, as they call them, figured out immediately who it was, and apparently it didn't take much effort, because those emails, we said, were allegedly her true emails. That they weren't made up for the show. Those were real emails that supposedly the real life person has sent. So people started copying and pasting those emails into Google and seeing what would come up. And very quickly, they found tweets that this woman made referencing some of the things that were in the emails, which were also discussed on the show. And they figured out that it was her. As it turns out, there is a physical resemblance between the actor and the character. And also they both talk in Scottish accents because they're both supposed to be Scottish. And so a lot of the characteristics lined up, and they realized that that's who he had to be talking about. So apparently it took them about 2 minutes to figure out this is who it was.
Right. Yeah, I've seen the pictures of the real woman and the actress. They do have a good similarity. And so it would seem that, in casting, either he had a hand in it or he gave them a reference, whether it was a picture of the real woman or a description or something like that.
Probably did. Now, the fact that they were able to look at those allegedly real emails and find her very quickly suggests that, well, maybe some of them were actually real emails. I don't know if there were 41,000 of them, but nonetheless, people were able to look at those emails on the screen and figure out that she was responsible for some of that content.
Right.
So that was interesting. There was one part about curtains. That's what it was, like some sexual innuendo about hanging curtains was made at the bar on the show. And apparently that was in a lot of those emails that you saw when people were putting those into Google or searching for those. They found tweets that referenced that, and also they were tagging him. Again, we know who the male lead in this is, right? Because he's playing himself. So she was tagging him or referencing him in some of those tweets that she was making at the time with that reference to hanging curtains or whatever it was. And so they were able to kind of put it all together.
And I think that's, that even if you change the name of the character and don't, you don't say their name, you don't say much about it, you change a little bit about their background to try to make it that they're not identified. The fact that it's talking about him makes her easily findable, because they could be like, well, if this took place over 5 years, at some point in that 5 years, you've talked to people about who this person is. If you pointed it out, you've said something, it's easily findable about either who was around you or who you talked to or what you've said in that time. So it's, so I understand she's filing a lawsuit then.
She's discussing that, right? So she came forward supposedly because she's been harassed, received death threats, right? People coming at her saying, how dare you stalk this guy? So she is threatening. Oh, we're getting a call back.
Is that her stalking you?
Yeah, right.
She's like, don't talk about me.
Hello.
Uh-oh, the live phone call. Who could it be?
Hello.
Is it a prank phone call?
Hi. No, I was trying to get her on speaker here. Here we go. Patricia.
Huh?
We have Patricia. I just wanted to congratulate you for your win.
Well, thank you. You have to congratulate everybody. Everybody did this.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. A clean sweep, all
And if it
15.
weren't for you for getting this lawsuit started, we would have never had an election.
Well, I congratulate you all for all that you've done. You guys made the noise about this from the beginning. And
Oh my goodness.
you guys wouldn't give up, right? I mean, very easy to give up faced with all that adversity over all that time. So I commend you for never giving up, for keeping the faith. And here we are. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, it was you, and Mary Jo and everybody else. This wasn't something that was done alone.
That's right. That's right. It took a group effort, but
Yes.
now the real work begins, right? So I want you guys to rest up, but when you guys get in there, you guys are going to have a big job ahead of you.
Well, we just had our first meeting, and we're meeting again June 13th. We elected officers tonight, and they're great.
Okay.
It's
Congratulations.
really exciting. It's really, really exciting.
Yes, yes, it is. It's a new day for Dayton Beach Park and really for Rockaway, for the whole Rockaway community.
This is, we were the underdogs. And if you look at those numbers, it shows how hard everyone worked.
That's right.
Tonight, Gracie would set up, like who's going to what building and where we were going. And they even had the police called on them.
Yeah, I know. Terrible. But that just shows you how desperate they were feeling at the time.
Well, to see the numbers that our team got compared to the numbers of the other team, we were nervous, but justice prevailed.
Yeah, that's it. And I knew that if you guys had a fair election, you would get those numbers because I always saw everyone in those buildings demanding the board be removed or the opportunity to vote against the board or just to have an election. And so they were really craving that, and they finally got it.
I can't tell you how hard they worked. I mean, it was such a group effort, and Grace every night would tell, like, we're going here, we're going to do that, making copies, doing everything. It was not done by one person. It was a Herculean effort, and I'm just overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, you should be. And you really should be proud. All you guys should be proud of what you accomplished. Right. We're all rooting for you here.
We will keep you posted on things as they go along, and I can't thank you enough, Mike.
I thank you, and let me know how I can be helpful in the future. Thank you, Patricia.
Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Good night.
So that was Patricia McCabe, one of our newly elected board members at Dayton Beach Park.
It sounds like they've hit the ground running. That they've already had their first meeting and selected people, so they're wasting no time.
They're wasting no time. See, I would have taken at least tonight off. They won tonight, but no, good for them. They're excited to do it. So
right.
They do get to rest a bit because you do need to recharge your batteries at some point.
Absolutely. Sure. So
all right. Well, that's good news. What were we saying about?
Talk about Baby Reindeer.
Yeah.
And like the lawsuit that she's putting forth, because she's contesting that it's not true.
Right. So the fact that they put this is a true story may open them up to more legal liability than they otherwise would have. There was something on Netflix before. I was actually looking at this. Did you see the Queen's Gambit on Netflix?
I saw about half of it.
Okay. So there's a part in there, again, supposed to be based on a true story, right?
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a part in there about this, I guess she was just a young girl at the time, entering chess tournaments, and someone made a comment that she never had real competition because she never faced a man before, something like that. And that was
Wow.
on the show. The real life chess player sued Netflix over that for defamation, saying
Mm,
that wasn't true and that harmed her reputation. It made her seem like she was not as good as she really was or whatever.
right.
Even though that comment is just an ignorant comment, I don't know if that really has any bearing on her skills, but nonetheless, she was saying that they said something that wasn't true about her and it hurt her. So
Sure.
there was emotion on that. And the court in that case decided that the lawsuit could proceed because a reasonable person watching might see that and watch that scene, even though they're saying that it wasn't literal word for word what happened, they might get the impression that that's
Right.
true about the player.
Sure.
So the standard for suing Netflix for defamation claims over these series, which are supposedly based in true events, but are dramatized to some degree, apparently isn't very exacting. I mean, it does seem like there is precedent that suggests that these cases can proceed based on false impressions about someone these shows may create.
Right.
So I do think that there is a potential for a lawsuit here. Of course, if it goes to discovery, let's say it survives, a pre-answer motion to dismiss and it actually proceeds towards trial, all the evidence would have to come out at that point. So we
Right.
would know, were there 41,000 emails sent? Did she have an arrest record? Was she ever sentenced? All
What
that
was her name
evidence,
before?
right? All that would have to come to light. And
Right.
so it's really interesting. Is she actually going to sue or not? Is she just threatening? Maybe she's hoping for a settlement. I don't know. I don't know.
Or
But
maybe she
the
just
thing is
wants
that
the
she has to
spotlight.
know, and she, by the, and in real life also, she does have legal training. She is a trained lawyer, so she has to know that if this proceeds towards trial, the evidence is going to come out, and so if she is lying now and say, "Oh, I never sent her 41,000, I never did it," she has to
Right.
know that's going to come to light.
Right.
Which maybe suggests that she's telling the truth, or some have posited that she is just so delusional she thinks that she's right, but she's
Right.
right, but she really did these things, but she's convinced herself that she's the victim.
Right.
So
Um,
I don't know,
yeah.
it's really kind of hard to put one's finger on. She did a whole interview with Piers Morgan for about an hour, so you can really look at her. I know some people were trying to psychoanalyze her from what they saw in that interview, but even then, it's just an interview, and she clearly is an intelligent person, so she's able to present things in a light favorable to herself. And so it's really hard to make a judgment just based on that clip. But
Especially when talking to Pierce, because he can tend to try to manipulate the conversation into a direction or an agenda that he has.
yeah, I think he was fair, though. I think he was fair on that. Here's something that's interesting. She didn't just do an interview with him. She also did interviews with the UK newspapers.
Hmm.
And supposedly, one of the reporters that was speaking to her for the story was called at least 50 times by her after the interview. And so that seems to lend support to
Um,
this idea that she has stalking tendencies.
50 times?
That's what he said. Yeah, she called me about 50 times after the interview to, I don't know, ask for clarifications or redactions, or I said this, but I meant this, or, follow ups, whatever.
Well, I mean, in how many days? Like what
Well,
was the time frame? Because we were just talking about the 40,000. That was like
right.
22 messages. That would be like 22 messages a day.
Yeah.
Like 50 messages kind of lends some evidence to her
Yeah. It was
having that capacity.
probably over a couple of days, right?
Yeah, like yeah, that's insane.
So the fact that they said this is a true story, not this is based on a true story, not inspired by true events, this is a
Right.
true story. Is that going to be interpreted as
Word for
them?
word.
Right. They have now a higher burden, or there's more
Right.
responsibility on their part to present it exactly as it happened. Or do they have poetic license to say, well, it's all the same. This is a true story based on true events, inspired. These are all just marketing ploys that we use, right? You see that, what was it? Blair Witch Project. I mean, everything nowadays says this is a true story or based on a true story, just
Right.
as almost a marketing tool to get people to watch it and be into it because they think it's real, right? So
Right.
does that really mean anything? I can see Netflix arguing, listen, that's just said. That's just part of what we say. Don't take that literally, you know?
Right. Like, could that be a literary tool to say,
Right.
this is a true story, even if it's fiction, but could that be part of the literary image you're painting?
Right. Now, there was also apparently a disclaimer. I'm not sure exactly where. I don't know if it's when you go into the menus on Netflix, if you read more about it, or somewhere apparently there was a disclaimer that part of these events were dramatized, which
Mm,
clearly a lawyer would have written to try to save them from liability in some way. I'll be honest, I didn't see that. All I saw was before every episode, this is a true story. So again, I'm sure Netflix will point to that language and they'll say, okay, but if you read the fine print, it says some things were changed. We took some liberties here. You know,
but was that in place before she started speaking out, or was that something they added afterwards? Because
no, I think that was always, from my understanding, that was always there somewhere. I'm not
uh,
sure where. It might be like if you go to the menus on Netflix and you say, read more about this or something like that. Like you kind of dig
right,
into it more. They might have some disclaimer language in there, but that's not what I saw when I played. I don't think that's on the show that you actually play.
right.
So the producers of this went to Parliament. They actually testified before Parliament in the UK, and they defended the show as being real. And they didn't make the
Mm,
argument that we just made it up for the sake of the story. They said it actually happened to the guy.
mm,
So obviously Netflix is going to be sued as well here, not just the creator of the show. She's
right.
clearly going to be looking to go after their pockets. But what role do they play? And did their lawyers not vet this? Did it not care? Did they not check to see if this was true? Because a lot of this would be easily verifiable. Again, did she go to prison?
Right.
Do we have a record
Yeah.
of this?
Yeah, that you can't. Yeah, were you gone for however many years she was? Like,
Right.
yeah, that's easily verifiable. And as someone, I guess you'd have to be incredibly delusional to think that you could hide that,
Right.
especially if
And there
she's
was
legally
something,
trained and she's going to go to court.
yeah. I'm not sure now if the alleged prison time, when they said, well, she had a different name, that's maybe when she went to prison, that might have been for another instance, not this one. Because I think she was this name for the past few years when this would have happened. So I think,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken, I think they verified that she didn't go for that, but they said that she might have, it's possible she could have for another harassment case in the past.
Wow. Okay.
So, and in the show, they presented her as being disbarred for allegedly stalking a family member of a what do you call that, member of parliament or something like that. So
That's easily verifiable too.
they they present her as having that history on the show. That might be what they're saying she got in trouble for under a different name in the past. I'm kind of unclear on that because I do believe she's had this name for the past several years, and I don't think this was too old. Then again, I think it goes back to like 2015 or something, so it's possible she could have had a different name for that too.
Right. So the thing is, like, since she's been found, and whether or not it's true or not, um, since she's been found and put out there, is there some sort of protection for her privacy in that regard? Like anyone can make a show, like I could make a show about um my whatever story and put in stuff about you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's my show. I put it whatever I want, and people can find can find you. I
Right.
mean, do you have any sort of privacy or protection in that regard? Like, can anyone just make up a story about anybody and
Well, right. And the legal query, at least here in the US, certainly under New York defamation law, is how would the reasonable person understand that? Would a
right,
reasonable person watch that show and come away with the interpretation that you were saying something about me that wasn't true and that was damaging to my reputation. Now,
Right.
there's also something called defamation per se, which is normally when you defame someone, for it to be defamation, you have to show damages. So if I say something, if I lie about you, right? Let's say I just make up some story about you that wasn't true. If you wanted to sue me and collect actual money for it, you would have to show what your losses were. Not only that I said something wrong about you, but that resulted in you losing money or you being damaged somehow, and the money that I'm going to pay you is going to make up for the losses that you suffered. Let's say you lost a job or something happened to you where it put you back, right? It did damage to your reputation, and you can quantify that. Well, that's how you know how many damages are deserved. Otherwise, we can sue for a dollar. I mean, you have to have actual damages. There's an exception to that, though. There's something called defamation per se, which is if the defamatory statement falls in a certain category, then damages are presumed. You don't have to prove your damages, but the law says you said something so nasty about someone that we're just going to presume that hurt them sufficiently to require compensation. So one of those categories is, and again, I can really only speak for US and New York law, but one of those categories for defamation per se is that you accuse someone of a serious crime that they didn't commit. And so this would fall under that. If they're saying that she harassed him and made threats towards his family and it resulted in her going to prison for it, that's a defamation per se category, that he's accusing her of being a serious criminal. And in that instance, she wouldn't have to show that she actually suffered financial losses. She can automatically get that compensation just based on the nature of the statement made against her.
Yeah, but think about it like this. Let's say it's all true,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she did do those things, and whatever, there was the legal action, and maybe there was some jail time, maybe there wasn't. Let's say all of that was true, and now we're in uh, a different space. Maybe she's turned her life around. She's got a new career, and she's got new relationships and family and
Right.
friends around, and she's changed her life. And now he's dug this up, and he's got her looking crazy in
Right, right,
this
right.
video. Like what kind of I don't know, protection does she have about, like, look, that was my past. I don't want that anymore. Now her new life is gonna be
Yeah, yeah.
drugged through the mud.
That's a fair point. The thing is, truth is an absolute defense to defamation. So if you can show that what you said was true, that's it. You win the case, right?
Right,
It's an affirmative defense. I mean, he would have to prove, the burden would be on him to prove that. But that's what the court case would be about, whether the stuff was true
right.
or not. If it's true, then she can't collect from him. There is that issue of, well, what about her privacy? And I think that's where him changing the name, at least taking surface level efforts to hide her identity, come in. I mean, if they were to, for example, use her real picture or her real name, well, then depending on your jurisdiction, you could have a claim under, for example, in New York, the civil rights law, for using someone's likeness for monetary gain without their permission, right? So that would be separate from defamation. I don't think that is triggered here because they don't use her name or her picture on the show.
Yeah, but they obviously didn't change it enough if people found her within like the first couple of
Right.
days, and the actress resembles her. Like they could have made the actress in the show, you know, slim,
Sure.
Bangladeshi, or you know what I mean? Like they could have really changed
It
it.
is, yeah. It's an interesting thought because it goes back to the Scarlett Johansson discussion we had
Right,
before. I mean, let's say she was a well-known lawyer in the UK, and they reproduced all of her attributes so that when
right,
someone saw that, they were like, oh, that's got to be such and such.
right,
And maybe there's a claim that you're monetizing her likeness for financial
right.
gain without her permission, you know.
Mm.
But as relatively anonymous, non-public figure, I don't know if just saying, well, they gave me a Scottish accent and they used someone that was of my body type, and that's monetizing my likeness, you
Well,
know.
not monetizing likeness, but just more making her identifiable, and which could intrude upon her present life.
Sure, but if we're saying that there's no defamation now, we're presuming that this is all true.
Right.
He has a right, and this
Yeah.
also goes back to which country this is going to take place in, because in the UK they don't enjoy freedom of speech the way that we do, right? But for example, if this were to happen in an American court, he would claim his First Amendment rights immediately, and he would say, "I'm well within my rights to make a Netflix show about my life, my
Right.
experience, and I'm not using her actual likeness on here. I'm changing the names and everything else, but I'm presenting my story, and I'm not defaming anyone. I'm not saying anything false. I'm not saying anything wrong, untrue, right? So who are you to
Right.
say they can't do that? This is my
Right.
story. I can tell my story."
Yeah. And that yeah, and that becomes a tricky thing because of, we're all involved in everyone else in other people's stories. And so at
Right,
any time, if they tell their story, then your story comes into that too because you're connected. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
so,
And,
and
and also there's
maybe
the
it's
idea
not
of the person is so easily identifiable. Like, for example, putting her emails on the screen,
right,
is that using her likeness? Well, maybe not her likeness, but using her words now. And so you're kind of tiptoeing around that idea
right,
of, monetizing someone else and making money off of them without their permission.
right. And yeah, again, if I go back to the situation where what if she doesn't want, people in her new life that she's recreated off of whatever happened back then, and she's moved away from that, and they didn't know any of this. Now they know, and all this change. Maybe let's say the person doesn't want compensation. They just want you to stop publicizing it, pull the show off the air,
Mm-hmm.
instead of asking for compensation
Yeah.
in form of monetary damages. Just
It's
stop
called
doing that.
let's call it injunctive relief. But again, they've got to show a violation of the law here. And
Right,
a question is going to be, do you sue them in the UK? Do you sue them in the US? Netflix is showing this everywhere, right? And
right,
so I think Netflix is availing itself to multiple jurisdictions. There may be some venue shopping on the part of the plaintiff in terms of which jurisdiction is going to give them the best chance at success. You may even see, and this is not legal advice, but this is just me spitballing, you may see a defendant filing a lawsuit first if he knows it's coming, to get the venue where that defendant thinks is going to help their case the most. That happens too.
and what I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so that happens too. I think we talked about that on that old episode we did called Pepsi, Where's My Jet? I think that's what it was,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Where Pepsi was about to be sued for the jet, for the Pepsi points program they had, right? This guy collected the
Right.
points, bought the jet,
Right.
and Pepsi knew a lawsuit was coming, so they actually filed a lawsuit first to get a case going in the state where they thought the law was friendlier to them. So you do see that happen as well.
And
So,
what happened? Like you mentioned that it was being, it's number one worldwide. So it's in all different markets. So if you pull the case in, let's say you try the case in the UK and they say, okay, you know what? You can't, you have to pull it, right? Um, would that law apply to them broadcasting it in the US?
it could, right? It just depends on the extent to which the law overlaps. And there is a lot of overlap between
Yeah, but could they,
international and US law.
I think in some cases you may have a head office, but they'll set up different things like you'll have Netflix UK, Netflix America. Like, would the law in the UK apply to Netflix America?
No,
So they could say, well, you can't show it in the UK,
right.
but the rest of the world can still watch it.
Potentially. But what
Right.
if there's damages? I mean, it may
Right.
not be so much about injunctive relief as much as she wants money for this. She wants to be financially
Right.
compensated.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
If I'm a lawyer in New York and I'm defending this lawsuit, if my client was already sued for these damages in the UK, I would be arguing she shouldn't be able to just sue us, in every country in the world and collect money. I mean, she chose
Right.
the court, she got her money, and let's be done with it now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to just flag a couple of, as you know what, that was one of the issues I wanted to bring up. The fact that this is Netflix and it's shown everywhere. And
Right.
that really relates even to internet law, right? Because we're talking about streaming now, not even talking about TV. When you put something on the internet, as Netflix really is, are you
Right.
availing yourself to be sued everywhere it's available? You know, I think in many ways you are. The other issue I wanted to bring up was I heard people talk about this notion, this is a true story, right? The reason why someone said, and I think a few people were saying this, that Netflix would put that out there was not for legal purposes, but was because it depicted stalking and even sexual assault and some really nasty things. And there's this idea that if they don't put that disclaimer in there that this is a true story, Netflix would get heat for glorifying or platforming or showcasing these bad behaviors.
Mm.
So people have said that that was a way for Netflix to protect themselves from the criticism. People are like, well, why'd you make a show about sexual assault? Why'd you make a show about stalking? You're normalizing this behavior. You know, and no, this actually happened to this guy. That was the reason,
Premise.
right? Like don't come down on us for making this show depicting all these negative behaviors. We're showing you something that actually happened.
Right.
Which to me is an issue, that's even a consideration. I mean, if you're going to do a Netflix show or any kind of show or movie or whatever, any kind of work of art depicting negative behaviors, whether it's sexual assault or stalking or threats of violence, mental illness, even, right? Affecting people, whatever it is, you shouldn't have to be apologetic for it and be like, well, we're only showing this because it happened to this person. You should be able to present that piece as a work of art showcasing that this type of behavior exists and is prevalent in the world. It could be a cautionary tale. It's not glorifying the behavior to depict it in a show, right, unless you're doing it in a way that clearly glorifies it. But if you watch this, he was clearly shown to be the victim on this show. So what would be wrong with having a show showing someone being stalked? That doesn't normalize or glorify stalking. It's the opposite, really. It shows that's a bad thing to happen.
Right. All right. That kind of brings me to the question, and I know it was completely fictional, but the show Dexter, where the main character is a serial killer, but he's kind of the good guy.
Right. Or so, Entourage. I sometimes watch Entourage replays when I'm trying to sleep. And because it's good. I don't mean that it's boring. I mean that it's good comfort viewing. You got to think about it. It's familiar. It's, you know, it's good background viewing. So people would say that show now wouldn't have been able to survive based on some of the conversation, the references, the way the characters are. But the thing is this, sometimes there are just nasty people in the world, right? I don't think we should pretend people like that
sometimes there definitely are.
Huh?
I said sometimes there definitely are nasty people.
Yeah. So what, we're gonna just pretend that everyone is perfect, that everyone on TV has to be a model citizen? I mean, why can't we have people on TV? We're kind of scummy. Yeah, and I get your point that, well, they're presented as the main characters and the protagonists or whatever, but it's still showing people who are human and who are doing things that are wrong. And I don't think it's on the creators of the shows and on the networks to present a utopian world, right? I think the people, the viewers, and if you worry about kids, the parents should have the responsibility to teach right from wrong. Because I'll tell you, when I was younger watching that, I didn't watch that thinking these guys were role models. I was like, oh yeah, these guys are kind of like douchey college type scumbags that you would encounter in life. I don't watch that thinking I want to aspire to talk like them and be like them. So I don't think it's wrong with showing all different types of characters on TV.
Right.
You know, but apparently this is the society that we're in now, where shows would hesitate. And I don't know if it's true with this one show, but that was posited. People put that out there, that's why they thought Netflix said this is a true story, so they don't get critique for presenting that kind of person on TV without the disclaimer that actually happened.
Gotcha.
So
Let's
All right.
put a poll out
Yeah,
there
let's
for
put the
that.
poll out there based on this. We want to know if people think these shows really should be taken seriously, even with the disclaimers, if people who are depicted on these shows, and again, like this one, they didn't have the character's real name or any immediately identifying information. Apparently, if you went on Google, you could find it, but just watching the show alone, you wouldn't have known who it was. And so, should the real life person in that instance be able to sue? Or should there be some kind of safeguard? Should there be creative license to have shows like this? So the poll of the week is, should the creators of TV and movie adaptations of real life events be shielded from liability for defamation claims?
Okay, yeah, we'll see what people have to say about that. And if anything, it should spark a conversation.
Right.
And there's probably, again, I'm sure there's some nuance. Like, to what degree should they be shielded?
Yeah, and I'm
You know,
interested in those answers, right? Where would you
right,
draw the line? And
right,
say this is a true story, does that create more of a burden or a responsibility on the show to present it
right.
accurately?
Yeah. So we'll see. But we did have before we wrap up, we did have a poll last week.
Yes, we have results on that.
We do have results on that. So the poll last week was about gotcha games and politics. The question was, do you believe that the prevalence of the gotcha game in politics is distracting from the actual business of solving problems? And we had a yes/no poll on that. 86% said yes, they believe so, and 14% said no.
They believe that
That
gotcha games.
is distracting from the actual business of solving problems.
Right, right. Yeah. And I was thinking back on that from last week. You know what I think what rubbed me the wrong way about that press release that came out criticizing the governor? On
Hmm.
one hand, it was saying that she was characterizing the problem as too serious, right? When she said there are black kids in the Bronx who've never even heard of the word computer or whatever, it was saying like, no, come on, how dare you say that? That isn't true. You're over exaggerating the problem, right? And then in the very next breath, they said she's not acknowledging the problem. She's not acknowledging that there is historic oppression and lack of access, right? Lack of resources. So how are they having it both ways? They're attacking her on the one hand by saying she's going too far and saying the problem is too big, it's not quite that bad. And the very next sentence, I think, or maybe even in the same sentence, they're saying that she's not acknowledging there's a problem. So it's really talking out of both sides of your mouth, and it
Not
comes off as very,
really.
very performative and phony.
Not, no, I definitely have to disagree and push back
Really.
there. Yeah, and we went through this last week, but it's not acknowledging the problem of the image that she was painting by saying that. Not that there's not trouble in some of those underserved communities and whatnot, but the fact that saying that there are black kids in the Bronx that don't even know what computers mean, that is part of the issue. That's a stereotype that keeps being pushed, and that's understanding how that impacts people in those communities, black kids in those communities. Not understanding that is part of the issue.
But that isn't an indictment on their intelligence or anything like that. By saying they never
It
heard
very
of
much
computers,
is.
by saying they never heard of it means that no one told them to, no one mentioned the word around them. So that has nothing to
Right. So you're
do with
saying in
them.
2024,
Yeah.
2024, these kids never heard of the word computer?
I
That
don't
makes
agree with
them
that.
sound very ignorant. That makes them sound very unintelligent
No, how is
or
it unintelligent?
others.
How is it unintelligent to have never been told what a computer is? That just shows that they live in an area where that access isn't there.
Because no, it's not. The whole world runs on computers. For them to not know that others them like it's a very
But how is
stereotypical.
that? I agree, it's wrong, and it's I wouldn't have said that, but it's not calling them stupid. It's
It,
saying that
it
they
is.
never had that access. They were never told that. If you never heard of something, that isn't because of lack of intelligence on your part. That means you never heard it. No one said it to you, right?
We're talking about a computer here. That's like
Anything.
saying they've never heard of a car before, and they live in a city where
Yeah,
cars are
yeah.
going up and down the streets.
So if
Like
that was the
it's
case, that wouldn't be a lack of intelligence for them not hearing about cars. It would be lack of intelligence to be like, yeah, you heard about cars, but you still never understood that, or you never understood, you don't get what that means. But to say you never heard it before means that no one ever told it to you before. How is that your shortcoming?
That's your shortcoming, not understanding the world around you. Like, this is such a prevalent thing in our community, and not a community, our society.
Yeah,
Computers are literally everywhere. They're in people's
right,
pockets. They're, for
right.
you to say, oh, well, they've never heard of a computer, when everything they touch every day is a computer. That just, it's like, how
I agree
stupid
that
do you
it's
think they are?
inaccurate. It's inaccurate, right? But
Yeah.
to crucify her over and put out a press release about it, and to cap, right? That was the thing we talked about. Nori said Trump comes off as more hip hop than Biden. I mean, I don't think capping on someone is hip hop, right? It's certainly not a New York thing to do. You're lying on the governor, and why? For cheap political points? You know, again, on one hand,
Lying on the governor about what? She
by
she
saying she's
said
not
something that was,
acknowledging. They said she did not acknowledge the severity. If you pull up the press release, she did not
I know.
acknowledge the oppression, but she did. That was the entire point of what she was saying. Again, she says some things that were not true and she shouldn't have said. I agree, but to have this reaction to it,
The actually, I think the was reaction was fine. I think her response when she made her apology, I think it was fine, and move on from there. I think everything, she was called out for saying something that was incorrect, and for spreading a stereotype that, whether she did it intentionally or not was what happened, and then she apologized, and you move forward. I think it was
her
fine.
apology was fine. Her statement was fine, but to go at her with a lie by saying that she didn't acknowledge that there was oppression, that was all that she was doing, right? So they're saying that she, number one, said the oppression was too bad, and then they said, well, you don't acknowledge that there's enough oppression in like the same sentence. You know what I mean? So there's really no credibility in that statement.
I disagree with what, yeah. I think their pushback was fine. I think her acknowledging that there was an issue was fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's complete performative, phony outrage, and I think this really hits on why Democrats lose elections. I touched on this last week. Again, it's the gotcha game. It's a distraction from the issues. What,
I don't think
86%?
that was a distraction. That's not a distraction.
It
The issue,
is. It is. She's
no.
there talking. It is. It's literally. That's exactly what it is. She's there talking about the lack of access in Black and Brown communities and how we have this Empire AI program, right? We want to give
Yeah.
access to this training and these jobs and this technology for the first time to right the wrongs of the past. That's acknowledging the historic inequities, right? And the
Sure.
lack of resources and opportunity. She's saying she
Sure.
wants to right that wrong. That was the entire point and purpose of her being there and making that speech, and right. And so in that, she said something that was, we agree, inartful, it probably inaccurate, right? It's just kind of a silly thing to say.
You're
But
diminishing it. That's the point. This is where
yeah,
we're having the diversion, is you're
no,
diminishing what she said and the implications of the imagery she brought up. And by doing that, you're missing that point. That's where we're gonna diverge. Because
uh,
you want to paint it, you want to diminish it by saying it's just an inartful comment. It was just a little thing like that.
you have to
No,
put it
it's
in
a
the
very,
context. Here's the thing: she's not like some Republican governor coming there saying we want to trample all your rights. She's as a Democratic governor coming in and saying we have historic oppression and we're here to right that wrong. And in that context, she said the access has been so bad here that some people haven't even heard of computers. Obviously, they've heard of computers. Okay, it's hyperbole, it's an exaggeration, it's a silly thing to say, it's stupid even. But the context here is she's trying to come in and help and right the wrong, correct the. That's the issue. That's the actual issue, right? The whole
that's
press
fine.
release that came out was not about that. It was the distraction. It was about, oh, she chose the wrong words when she described how bad the problem is. That's the
That's
distraction from the actual issue of helping
But that's
right the
only one
wrong.
issue. You're focusing only on one issue, and you're missing the other issue of the mischaracterization, the stereotyping of people, and that is par for the course. That has been damaging
Mm.
for generations. And so you can come out and say, yes, this is there's been a lack of access in here. We've failed this community miserably, but using a stereotype to do that also is an issue. they're both an issue. That's the
It's a
thing. Like she can be,
it's a stereotype to say you haven't even heard. Access is so bad, you guys haven't even heard of this stuff. That's a stereotype.
it's a stereotype to paint this image that you know, black kids, black people in general are less intelligent, are less aware, are
But
not part of it. That's pervasive.
that has
And
nothing to do with
so
intelligence, though. Nothing to do with intelligence.
it
It's
has
saying
it has
you
everything
have
to
the
do with
access.
that. And it's not just about the access. That's why her words had to be, you know, called out, because it's like you're saying on this hand that, you know, we failed this and that, and then on this hand there's kind of a backhanded insult in there. And so
I don't think that was intended as
calling that out,
but by
calling
putting that
that
in,
out, no
you don't look at
problem.
the context to look at the intention behind that. Did you really think she was trying to
Not
insult
always.
people?
No, she may not have, but that doesn't, that's, and then, you know, she may not, I'm not saying that she did it purposefully to
Yeah.
insult people. I'm not saying that. And a lot of times we get these, you know, there may be some racial comments, some stereotypical comments, and they may not be intended to be as such, but we've gotten so accustomed to saying certain things that are incorrect that the damage that they have been caused is not recognized. And so calling that out is very appropriate, in my opinion. And I
That's
don't think
more
that there was an issue with that.
that's more of a nuanced, subtle discussion. And I agree that that's appropriate, but that wasn't what that press release was. That wasn't nuanced or subtle in any way. That took everything out of context, and it straight up said she failed to acknowledge the historical oppression when that's literally what she was there to do. And so someone reading that is going to, number one, either be misled, right, and think that, oh, she was just there talking trash about people without even having a positive message. She was just there to clown on people or something. They're going to have that false impression, or they're going to think this is phony performative outrage because the governor was actually there to help with a positive message. But you didn't focus on any of that. You just focused on the one thing that she said, which you said was what, perpetuating a stereotype. And by the way, the people saying this are the ones who are the governor's political opponents in the first place. But
Right.
so it's like this doesn't come off as genuine. This doesn't, you know what I mean? This doesn't come off as real. If you're a voter out there, this is why you're turned off from the Democratic Party, I think.
It can be seen, I mean, for the fact that they are political opponents of the governor does have a part in the conversation, because you can say and see it from the angle that you're seeing it from, where this just looks more performative because they found something there, she made a misstep or she screwed up or she whatever, and they want to dig on that point so they can get political points. That is absolutely relevant. At the same time, what they're digging on is also absolutely relevant. And so
But then don't lie about
that's
it.
why I think
Then don't lie about it.
the
Be honest about
situation.
it. They don't have to lie. They don't have to mischaracterize the situation. They said that she said what she said
Well, I think
without
they can be both.
acknowledging the historical oppression, which is completely false. Right? We talk about
I think there
defamation.
could be elements of both in there. I think what, to me, that's why I said, to me, the way that it was handled seemed okay. Like they put out their statement, the governor apologized, she said she regrets it, and then move forward, and then, you know.
Only because of the political pressure that ensued from that
Right.
statement, which carried false implications. A lot of people pressuring the governor to apologize weren't getting the context. They weren't getting all of what she said. They were getting that press release and the tweets and the retweets and the comments on Facebook and whatever. And it just took that one little statement and it didn't provide the actual context of what she was really trying to say. And so that's why she had to apologize, because of the political pressure that mounted based on that statement, which really wasn't entirely accurate.
But people who are retweeting, I mean, and here we're talking about, you know, internet
Mm-hmm.
discourse, but a lot of times when people will retweet and would tweet, the fact is people will see that statement as yet again
Mm.
more attacks on us, you know, more misunderstandings of us, more perpetuation of the stereotype, regardless of what the rest of the context is.
But if they
People are going to
see,
see that and feel that.
sure, but if they see the rest of the context, they're going to have probably a different reaction on a whole.
Some might,
Yeah.
absolutely. Some definitely might.
because it makes a difference. You can't act like it doesn't make a difference. The fact that she said the whole reason why she was there giving that speech, talking about that issue, was that there's a lack of access in these communities, and she has this new program and a budget that she's going to direct towards these communities to make up for that oppression. That was some of the substance of what she was saying. Now, in that, she said something that was quite frankly stupid. But if that's all you see and you don't see the whole context of it, I think you can have a different reaction to it.
A little bit, but the fact it was still put out there and still said, so, but I mean, the apologies there, move forward.
I got a New York pass here. I was going to rip up this pass. I think we're going to hold on to it. The jury's still out on this for a Septimo. See, I was going to say Septimo has to go, but
who? What?
Septimo was the one who put out that press release, right?
What's the New York pass?
I was going to revoke her New York pass because she wasn't acting like a New Yorker. New Yorkers have attitude. New Yorkers don't do that, right? New Yorkers don't play the gotcha game. New Yorkers.
Are you kidding? New Yorkers do it all the time.
A true New Yorker is going to do that?
What?
Why do you say New Yorkers do that all the time?
It's constant. People misunderstandings or misspeaking or going after each other, jabs here and what?
The New York attitude, though, is to kind of laugh at that and say, listen, what are you really trying to say? We see the difference is the New York humor is we can laugh at a problem and know that we're making fun of the problem and not the people victimized by it, right? We're making fun of the stereotype. Some people will look at it like, no, you're making fun of the oppressed or something like that.
That's not the New York attitude. A little different, though. And that's a little bit of a different situation. And I understand that because, one of the top forms of comedy in Hawaii is basically stereotype comedy.
Right.
And people outside of Hawaii wouldn't get it. Like that wouldn't play in the rest of the country. But within Hawaii, it's kind of normalized. And whether or not the people that are, directed at feel a certain way or not, I'm saying that's kind of what the environment is there. So I understand that. But
yeah, I don't think that was a very New York thing to do. Yes,
I think it was very
subtle,
New York.
Nuance. You can pull her aside and like, hey, the problem isn't quite that bad. But to put out that press release, and again, we know this is a political opponent, right? You put out the press release,
I think it's very New York.
Only focus on the one subject, and you take the entire context out, and then you lie about it, and you say that she didn't acknowledge historical oppression when that was the very purpose of what she was doing, even though she didn't do it in the best way. That's not New York. That's not hip hop.
That's New York. That's New York.
No, it's not. No, it's
not.
What
are you talking about? It's not hip hop. People step on shoes and it ends up in a block busting brawl. Like
all right, but clowning on someone's shoes though?
Yeah, come on. Yeah, that definitely happens. That definitely happens.
That sensitive. The New York attitude is not to be as sensitive. We can't be. We can't afford to be that sensitive here because of all the nonsense that we live with day by day.
Yeah. Okay.
So
anyway,
that's not very New York.
Anyway,
we have to. You know what? We got to keep this New York pass. If someone does something that's not very New York, I think the pass got to be pulled.
Okay. All right.
So it's
like our version of the donkey of the day. Like you lose your New York pass.
Why not? Let's do it.
Yeah.
Pass. All right. Yeah. So I've heard your statements, and I will not pull her pass based on your statements. But I will say the eyes are open now. We will have to see what happens in the future and reserve judgment on whether that pass should be pulled in the future.
All right. Word up. So, all right, well, we've gone extra long today. We've been pushing it quite long lately.
Yeah.
No Diddy.
I have no idea how that relates, but all right.
So, yeah, people can, is there a bottom line? You got a bottom line today?
You know what? We heard that. Yeah, we heard from Patricia McCabe again. Congratulations to Dayton Beach Park on the new board being elected unanimously, 15 for 15. They had to put up with a lot to get to that point, a lot of shenanigans. And so I would say the bottom line is don't lose the faith. If you believe in something, continue to fight for it, right? It may seem dark and dire now. It may seem like change is never going to happen, but it takes brave people to keep standing up, keep pushing back in the face of adversity, and say, we understand that if we keep fighting, a better day is upon us.
All right. All right. That's a good message. And for people to check in and fight or discuss and argue with us and others, to hit the comment section on YouTube, and everywhere that the podcast and the video is put. So, well, YouTube for the video. Hit us up on Instagram as well. And yeah, check us out. Say what's
All
up.
right. As always, we've got work to do, and we'll catch you next week.